Hello and welcome to Read Some Books podcast. I'm Shane Skelton, your host, and joining me today is Josh Fillmore, and we're here today to talk to you about books.
Books. Lots of books.
Books. Now, our purpose in doing this podcast is to help you lead a better life by reading better books.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I feel like if I can encourage you to read books, you will become a better person because you're thinking better.
Okay.
Yeah, readers are thinkers.
Am I not a good person? Or?
Well, that's how you wouldn't. But you can become better.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's right.
Everybody can become better.
Yeah. Also, we want to try to cut down on the clutter and point you in the right directions of what good books are to read. Each week, I plan on reviewing a book and give you my impressions about the book, the review about the book, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will, about the book. And then you can decide whether or not you want to take your hard-earned money and your precious time and read it.
Absolutely. And that's part of the problem where, I'm not as big a reader as Shane here. And that's part of the problem. As you go into the bookstore, and I'm sure I can attest to just about everybody that does not read, you walk into the bookstore and you see all of those books, and it's like, where do I even start? Like, I've got it. Yeah, absolutely it is. So you go in and you're like, you know what? I want to find a good book that's not going to waste my time. And, I don't want to, that's my biggest fear is that I'm going to go and spend 3 weeks reading this book. And then I'm going to be like,
3 weeks? What are you reading? War and Peace?
3 weeks reading a book. And I'm going to be like, man, what a waste of time that was, and because time is precious. We don't have enough. Time is precious. So, and that's my biggest fear. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys out there that's listening can, contest to that as well, that, where do you find the time and how do you pick the right one so that you don't feel like the time that you put into it is a waste?
That's correct. Now, full disclaimer, before we get too far into this, is that Josh and I both are committed Christians. Mm-hmm. We are true followers of Jesus Christ. We've committed our life to Him. Yep. And I, in particular, am a pastor of a church, and also I'm the president of a nonprofit organization. We publish, actually, and translate the Bible into what is known as the unreached people groups of the world. And these are the people who have never heard of Christ and don't have a viable church in their group, and so we translate the Bible for them so that a church can be established and the people can be evangelized. So I'm surrounded by books. Mm-hmm. So that's a full disclaimer there, and we're Christians. But that being said, all the books that we review will not be entirely Christian. Right. A lot of different books with different subjects we'll talk about, though the majority of them will, be Christian books. There's no doubt about that. But I want to talk about other things, history and political science and, poetry. Can you believe that?
Poetry.
And, poetry, and self-help and philosophy and some fiction we'll throw in from time to time. Biographies. I love biographies and autobiographies. We'll talk about books that have to do with things that we go through in our life. Family issues, raising children, things of that nature, maybe even some hobby books and some DIY books, books for dummies.
Are you calling me a dummy?
I'm not calling you a dummy. Even though I'm looking at you, I'm not calling you a dummy.
Now, full disclosure on my part, I do listen to audiobooks. Does that count?
I would say that counts, yes.
Okay. Because I've listened to a slew of audiobooks.
Absolutely, that counts. So. But it's like, in my opinion, it's like kissing your wife through a screen door. You don't get the full effect. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
There's something about a book in your hand that really there's no parallel to it.
Got it.
So, but audiobooks is absolutely good. I enjoy audiobooks myself, especially in the car.
Right.
And when I'm traveling, audiobooks is awesome, and I like that. But my goal is just to inspire you to read. Okay. If I can inspire you to read, if I can get you to love books and to love reading, to love learning, you're going to be a better person. And that's what we want. And we also want to try to just help our audience to weed through the clutter and to find the right book. And there's going to be books that we review that you might be interested in, that you've heard a lot about, but after you hear the review of it, who cares? I mean, you don't want to go spend your hard-earned money. It's a lot of books are got a good cover, but they don't have a lot of good content.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about that, and then you can decide for yourself. And there might be some that you would never even think of going out and purchasing, but after the review, you're like, man, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. And then I want to challenge you to think through, issues, and especially when we get to books that have to do with political science, and don't just be part of the herd that's following after the media and following after what everybody else is saying. That you analyze the situation and you think it through, and that's part of our goal, and to accomplish that, to get people to think, and that comes through reading. Readers are thinkers.
Gotcha. Now, here's part of the problem that I have, and I'm sure, again, most of the listeners can probably attest to this, is where do you find the time? Like, I have a super busy schedule, and I'm sure everybody else out there listening's got a super busy schedule. You got wife, kids, job, hobbies, things that need to be done around the house, and by the time you eat, sleep, and the time's gone. So absolutely. That's one of the biggest struggles that I've found is really learning how to time manage myself to
There's
be
a book
able.
For that.
Of course there is. So that's where I get to, that I struggle with that. And a little bit about me, I'm your average schmo guy. I got, I work, I got wife, kids, hobbies and duties that I have to, do. And
a hobby you have to do? Yeah,
absolutely. I have to do hobbies.
I agree with that.
Gotta have that break from the mundane,
I agree.
But, I never went to school. I went to college, but I didn't graduate college. I didn't do,
That's all right.
I went and got a job and worked, and I figured, if I wanted to continue doing my hobbies, then I need money to, support my hobbies. So,
gotcha.
So that, I never really put in or ingrained in that habit of reading. Even in college, I didn't read. It was like, well, if I can't just, do it, then I just won't do it,
Right.
And so I never really got that part. And that's one of the things that I regret, is that I never put that and instilled that in my DNA to really love books enough to want to make the time to do it.
Yep. Well, that's where it does begin. It begins with a desire. You have to have a desire to do it. I was in the same position you were in 20 plus years ago. And when I graduated high school, if the only thing that I read was a Waffle House menu. That's no joke. That was the extent of my reading. I did not like to read. Right. I found it boring. I found it, tedious. It all boiled down to the fact I wasn't disciplined. Mm-hmm. I wasn't disciplined to sit down and read a book. But it wasn't until I started in my first pastorate that I began to realize that if I don't put in, then I'm not going to be able to put out. So I had to fill the well up. I had to fill the reservoir up in my heart and in my mind. So I began basically out of sheer desperation. I've got to preach to these people. I've got to say something. I got to have something beyond the simple outline that I had, and I had to put it in. And so it was through a mentor of mine that literally just took me under his wing early on in my ministry and took me into his library. And when I walked into his library, it was shelf after shelf, room after room, from floor to ceiling, of just books stacked 2 and 3 deep on the shelf. And he just told me, he said, listen here, pick whatever book you want, spend a week with it, and bring it back, and I'll give you another one.
Did you say a week?
1 week. Yeah, that's what I said.
To read it.
Like I needed a month.
I would have failed.
Yeah,
right off the bat.
I need a year on this. So I picked the smallest thinnest book I could find on the shelf. This looks like paper thin. I'll take that. And so I did. I picked out a little book written by a man he's no longer alive, but his name was Keith Naus, and he wrote a little book. It's an obscure book, but it's a small book called Heartbeats of the Holy. And in that little book, I took home and read it, and the statement that he made was, God works through a man what God works in a man. And that resonated with me, because I knew that there wasn't a whole lot in me, you know, and I needed God to work through me, but he had to have something to work with.
Right.
So I made a commitment that day. I made a commitment that I would read one book a week. Now, that was a big commitment.
Yeah.
I would read one, that, you know, in my naivety as a young man. Yeah, sure, I can do that. I didn't realize the enormity of that commitment, but that's been 20-something years since then, and I've been able to, for the most part, keep that commitment. Now, my reading over the last few years has become more channeled and more disciplined in the fact of my subject matter and what I'm looking for. I take more time now to digest certain things and to dig deeper into things. So I may spend more time than a week with a book, but on an average, you know, I still spend a week and I'll spend with a book.
Okay, so how do you read? I'm sure we're going to get to this later on.
Sure.
But how is it that you read a book in a week? Like, I'm lucky to get through a few chapters in a week, much less.
Well, there's actually there's a great book that we'll review.
Of course there is.
It's called How to Read a Book.
Okay, all right.
It's an excellent book by Mortimer, and it really teaches you how to dissect a book and read it. But you know, to make a short story long, what we'll do is basically you divide it, just like you divide your week. You got a week of 7 days, then you know if you've got 150 or 250 or 350 pages or chapters or whatever how you want to divide it out. You just, this is how many I've got to read today. This is what I've got to read in order to get it done. Now, if it's a larger book, obviously you're going to have to spend more time with it.
Right.
If it's a smaller book, then, you know, you've got time to play with. You can be flexible. But if you're passionate about something, you'll find time to do it.
Gotcha.
You'll either get up early, or you'll go to bed late, or you'll work it in your lunch breaks, like I've done a lot. You know, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. You may not be able to watch Seinfeld in the evening, you know, or The Office or anything like that, Parks and Rec. So now you know my humor. Right. But you might not be able to spend a lot of time doing that.
Right.
But if you're passionate about it, you will find the time that you need to do it. And I've spent a lot of time on Saturdays, you know, catching up on my reading or things of that nature. So, yeah, you can find time to do it. It's just going to take some discipline on your part to get it done.
Gotcha.
But I started just like you, and after a while, people started asking me, you know, hey, what are you reading? What do you think about this author? What do you think about this book? And it became, you know, in my circle, I became known for, you know, being as the book man.
The librarian.
Yeah, the librarian. Yeah. I got a bun on my head.
There you go.
Yeah, the band bun. But, I became known as that. So it's a natural progression for me to be sitting here today to say, hey, look, you know, this is what I think about this book, you know, and I don't have to, you know, think real hard about this, because it's a natural progression for me over the last 20-something years.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how your passion and my lack of passion is going to work with this channel. So, but anyway.
But I'm going to make you smarter no matter what.
Okay.
Yeah, even through dialogue. You're going to get smart.
Either way, right?
Right.
That's awesome.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much sums it up for today. You know, anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
Well, I think the first thing that I can say is, you know, moving from here forward, the greatest book to read is the Bible.
I agree.
Start there.
Right.
Start with the Bible, and don't read it just for knowledge, but read it for relationship.
Which, of course, is the hardest book to read.
It is. It's not if you know the author.
That's true.
That's right.
Very true. Very
That's
true.
Right.
Well, of course, we all read the King James. You know, that's what our church does here. So, you know, which, of course, can be challenging for some.
It can be. I agree. It can be. We don't use a lot of the words that are in it, but it's written beautifully.
Right.
You know, it's actually written to where you can memorize it very easily. The way that the sentences are broken down and the structure of it, it's very easy to read if you're memorizing Scripture.
Gotcha. And I'm sure we'll probably dive into that too.
We will. We will.
All right. Very good. Well, again, my name is Josh Fillmore. Just a quick, add to this is that we do actually have a YouTube channel. If you are just listening to the podcast, we do actually have a YouTube channel. It is what's the podcast channel?
I don't know. You tell me.
Go read some books, man.
Read some books.
The name of this podcast. It is also the name of everything that we have listed on social media.
Should we tell them where we got the name?
No. Well, let's see if we can figure it out.
Go read some books.
We'll see if they can figure it out. If you know the name of it and you're watching on YouTube or on social media, drop it in the comments. Let us know if you can figure out where the name came from. I'm sure there's probably somebody going to figure it out.
All right, hint, it's a line in a movie.
No, there you go.
A great movie.
A great movie.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are on Facebook as well. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, all with Go Read Some Books. We're, as you have already been stated before, we are also on YouTube. So if you guys are watching us now, you already know that. And of course, we are on podcast. If you're listening from the podcast, or vice versa, any of the other channels, we are going to be on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and any other podcast app that you may have.
Sounds good to me. I'm excited about it.
Yep.
Now, let me close by making this statement. Charlie Tremendous, they call him Jones, which was a great businessman and later on became a motivational speaker, and his quotes have been they've been publicized for years. But he made this statement. He said, "You will be the same person in 5 years as you are today, except for the people you meet and the books you read. So choose carefully."
That is pretty powerful.
It is powerful. So hopefully in 5 years, our audience would be better off.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, that's it for today's episode, guys. First one in the books.
Yeah.
The origin story.
Go read some books.
Go read some books, guys. God bless. And we will catch you in the next episode.
Take care.